I believe the time has come. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live Roundtable. I hope you've enjoyed these roundtables over the past few months. We have held them about monthly over the past few months. Our first featured some members of our SOC team talking about our annual threat report. Then we held one discussing the Forrester wave on MDR. And finally, we held a Women in Cybersecurity panel. You can find all of those on our YouTube channel. And the URL for that is youtube.com/@Expel Security. Check that out. In fact, today, you're going to recognize Aaron Walton, who's joining us, who is one of our participants for the annual threat report roundtable. Let's go ahead and invite in our guests. All right. So today is a particularly interesting topic. We're going to be diving into one of the most talked about threat groups in the wild right now, Scattered Spider, and particularly a crafty subset of the group known as Atlas Lion. I'm going to flash a URL on screen again. This will take you to a two-part blog series we published that covers Atlas Lion activity in detail that we uncovered here recently. I will continue to flash this link throughout the session, so don't worry if you miss it. But you should go check it out. It's really interesting. But again, we're going to give kind of an overview of that today. My name is Ben Baker. I'm the Director of Content here at Expel. I'll be your host and moderator. We're planning to run for about 30 to 45 minutes, and the goal is to help you understand what we've seen in the wild. Again, a rarely used and quite creative, if I may say so, tactic by this group, how we caught it, and how you can defend against similar behavior in your environment. If you don't know about Expel, a little background about us. Again, then I'll stop talking. We're a managed detection response provider, or an MDR. We work a little differently. We integrate with security tools our customers already use. We got over 130 integrations with leading security tools, and we bring that data into our proprietary platform called Expel Workbench. Think of it like a two-way mirror in a way. Our analysts operate in it. Our customers can log in and see what our team sees in real time. And because we're pulling telemetry in from all these tools environments, we're able to identify trends across attacker behavior, and that's exactly how this session came together. Our team spotted something, jumped on it, published findings that have since been picked up by a couple of publications within the industry. All right, here we go. Time to introduce our esteemed guests. We'll go with Aaron first. All right, Aaron is a senior threat intel analyst here at Expel. As a career changer, Aaron brings a diverse skill set to his work, sharing intelligence that helps others study, hunt, and stop bad actors. When he's not at a computer, you might find him playing the Irish flute at a local pub, which is one of my favorite facts about Aaron. I know I mentioned this last time during the ATR session. This isn't in his official bio, but I've said it once, I'll say it again. He's one of the last remaining Renaissance men in this world. I think we should do an entire roundtable focusing on Aaron Walton one day. Maybe just a roundtable about Aaron. Anyways, next up, we got Jenny Maynard. Jenny, glad you could join us today. She is a senior incident response analyst here at Expel. She investigates high-impact security incidents, everything from business email compromise to ransomware to web server exploitation. Outside of incident response, she's into experimental legume-related fermentation projects. I don't even know what that means, but she also enjoys reading poetry, which I love. So, anywho, that's an epic combo to me. Last but not least, Ben Nahorny's here with us, senior technical marketing writer here at Expel. He's been writing and researching about the threat landscape for several decades, and when he's not keeping up with the latest cyber attacks, he is, in fact, wondering if the latest cyber attacks are keeping up with him, which is true, I think, of all of us. But well said. Huge thanks to you three for being here. A little like housekeeping before we get rolling. Look, we'll try to leave some time for Q&A at the end of this session. However, if you have any questions, drop them into the chat, and we may hit those in the middle of the conversation, or we may hold them till the end. And if we run out of time, we'll follow up afterwards. I know I've mentioned this in the past. A lot of times with webinars, we'll follow up with blogs and whatnot if there are any outstanding questions. All right, great panel. Weird threat group, new tactic, maybe a weird panel, great threat group. I don't really know what the combo is there, but it's going to be great. Let's do this. And I start off these every time by asking something called a very important question. It's a tradition we do here at Expel, where we start off some of our meetings by asking a question that kind of gets you thinking a little bit, and it truly is very important. I keep a mug on my desk full of these. Fun fact about me, I've got about 4 in here, and they're all very good. I'm going to pull one and ask the panel about the very important question to start off. All right, this is a good one. You can suddenly become world-class at any useless skill. What skill do you choose? Who wants to take that first? Anybody have an answer? Which skill do you choose?
What is a useless skill? I feel like most skills have some sort of utility.
That's true. That's a good point. You know what? That was a useless question. Let's get a different one. Here we go. This is a great one. If aliens made first contact and asked you to explain human culture using only one movie, which movie would you choose? When I initially read this one, for some reason, the first thought that popped into my head was Die Hard. And I'm not 100% sure that would be a great way to explain human culture. Maybe it would be. Any thoughts on that one?
Well, my mind first goes to sci-fi films, so I don't know if that really applies. So,
Aliens.
yeah,
I mean,
E.T. may not be the best. So
maybe.
that does come to mind.
Yeah, there you go. We'll take that. Any other thoughts, Aaron, Jenny?
Yeah, I think Children of Men is really good.
Children of Men.
That's what I'm showing the alien.
All right. Very good. Very good.
Yeah. I'm not really someone who watched many films, so I don't have a recommendation. So I would probably need to do a bunch of research. But ideally, you'd want to find something that is going to result in some positive outcomes.
That's true.
Right? So you want to illustrate like how humans treat aliens very well, how there's a good partnership there, good possibilities can come out of it.
That's a good point. Yes, that's a good point. So what you're saying is we should show them Die Hard. Yeah, that's good.
But it sounds like we might have some time to produce a good film before they do come.
That's a good point. That's a good point. For all of those producers and directors watching this, we have an idea for a movie for you from Aaron Walton here. All right, let's hop into it. So we're going to start off with sort of a wide aperture, looking at Scattered Spider as a group, and then we're going to move into a discussion on Atlas Lion and specifically about sort of this threat pattern that we saw. And then we're going to get into some application. That's kind of what we're looking at this for this session. So we're going to start at the top with sort of a broad aperture, and I'm gonna give the first question to Aaron. Aaron, again, starting wide here, give us a high level view of Scattered Spider. Its connection to this group called the Com, and based on your research, does this group have sort of a unique specialty or calling card, if you will?
Yeah, the name Scattered Spider sometimes gets thrown around quite a bit. The reason they got that name was because of a decentralized nature, because they're scattered. And a lot of that it's usually used to refer to a bunch of groups that are part of this group they call themselves the community. They're often young people, young males between the ages of like 16 and 23. A lot of them are interested in doing a variety amount of crime, just kind of to get street cred and those types of things. They're often involved in violence, and there's a lot that goes on to that. But another thing that they really specialize in is SIM swapping and targeting phones in that regard. So if you're not familiar with SIM swapping, you're probably familiar with SIM cards that go into your phone. There's techniques to trick phone providers to port the SIM from a potential victim to your device. And what that's going to allow you to do is to get SMS messages and other content intended for the victim being sent to you. And the folk within the Com specialize in doing some of the SIM swapping or also targeting SMS with SMS phishing. And they primarily do that in order to gain access and bypass MFA. So that tends to be something that's pretty characteristic of any of the groups that are part of the Com and any of these subgroups. So talking about Scattered Spider, a few other names such as Atlas Lion, which we'll talk about, and Star Fraud. There's a great number of these, ends up making a pretty diverse group. As a result, when people talk about Scattered Spider, it really helps to back up a little bit and make sure you know who you're talking about and what actors you're talking about, because we can often narrow it down a bit further and see very distinct tactics for each of these different subgroups.
Yeah, that's helpful. You mentioned Atlas Lion. Obviously, that's sort of the subset that we think is, tied to this specific sort of threat activity that we're zeroing in on today. And, you had a heavy hand in kind of pinning sort of the narrative, with the blog and pulling some of the data together. Who is Atlas Lion? I guess, in your words, what do we need to know about these guys?
Well, Atlas Lion is a group that has some affiliations with the Com, and these folks are believed to be operating out of Morocco. And interesting side note there, the name Atlas Lion, it comes from a now extinct subspecies of lion that actually was last seen in Morocco back in the 1960s. It's also known as the Barbary lion. You may be familiar with it from stuff like the MGM logo that you see at the beginning of movies with the lion roar. Think that type of line. So that's where the name comes from, kind of interesting. But this is a group that's known for targeting retailers that issue gift cards. That seems to be one of their primary MOs. They go out there, try to steal gift cards, and then figure out how to either redeem them or sell them to fund their organization ultimately. The other thing that they're really well known for is that they often infiltrate organizations using compromised credentials. They perform a variety of reconnaissance and, ultimately stealing cards and whatnot. And we'll talk more about this as we go.
That's good. It's a good kind of overview. Jenny, a lot of these questions that we're going to be pointing at you, we're going to be pointing at you from sort of the lens of our resident detection expert, because you are our resident detection expert today. So, it sounds like both of these groups specialize in various types of identity-based attacks. We've talked about them gathering credentials through various means. From a detection and response perspective, how challenging is it to defend against these kinds of identity tactics? Are there any kind of red flags or tells that you kind of look for from a detection perspective?
Yeah, so I think when we're thinking through like a detection and response capacity, we definitely want to make sure that we're able to detect and identify, both in kind of like the pre-exploitation phase, before initial access, at the initial access phase, and then at post-exploitation, or, once we start getting to the actions on target or post-exploitation. If I had like a hit list of things that I'm looking for when I'm actually trying to identify whether an attacker is in an environment, we can look, we're looking at things like anomalous login properties. Obviously, that's not specific to the COM or any specific group. Practically anything that you can create a conditional access policy based off of, that's something that you can look for, when we're investigating. So anomalous login times, unusual hosting VPN infrastructure, unusual user agent. In this particular case, for these actors, we observed them trying to maybe like access applications which the user is not provisioned to. So there's a lot that you can get into there. If we're thinking about actions on target, so post exploitation, we have even potentially more detection opportunities, right? Large access to like a large volume of like SharePoint files. We can look at access to specific files that are pertaining to like endpoint management, because that's something that these groups are potentially interested in doing, is pivoting into the network environment. So yeah, there's a ton there. So I have like a list in my mind when I'm looking, at activity. I'm like, okay, this, and this. So we've identified an incident.
Yeah, that's great. And I know that, a lot of that stuff is also kind of what you identified within what we're looking at today. Again, if you want the full story here of what we're talking about today, you can check it out at expel.com/blog, Observing Atlas Line Part 1. The link to Part 2 is also in there as well. I actually learned on our platform that we can do a ticker down here. I thought about rolling that the entire time, but I'm not going to do it. Maybe I should. All right, let's pivot to Atlas Lines. That's a good overview of Scattered Spider. Appreciate you guys doing that. Let's go to Atlas Lion, and I'm going to point the first question here to Ben Nahorny. So, again, we're sitting here today because our team at Expel helped sort of thwart this threat tactic that's rather creative and unique by Atlas Lion. Can you kind of walk us through this attack? It was more identity-based sort of attacking, I believe. How did they get the credentials, and then what did they do once they got those credentials?
Yeah, there's actually several stages I kind of looking at the start that I kind of break it down into. And the first is that initial access, which this all started out with a SMS phishing campaign. And what they ultimately used was a phishing site that mimicked some of the cloud-based services of the target, attempting to trick people into entering their credentials ultimately. So if somebody is tricked into doing something like entering their username, password, and even MFA tokens, those credentials are then immediately used by this phishing kit on the back end to actually log into the legitimate domain of the target organization. So this ultimately brings the attacker into the environment. At that point, they tend to do something like steal the session cookie, so they're able to maintain some persistence. But then they take it a step farther as far as maintaining persistence. And one of the first fascinating things they have been doing is ultimately, once they have control over an account, they'll go and enroll their own MFA devices within that account. Ultimately, that allows them to maintain persistence over an extended period of time, but also to log in from other devices if they so choose to do so. So the second part of this, and this is the really fascinating thing that we saw in this particular attack, was that the attackers in this case created a virtual machine in their own Microsoft Azure cloud tenant. Now, with that VM, what they ended up doing was taking some of these stolen credentials and logged into the VM. Now, what that ultimately ended up doing, because the target organization was also using Azure and had a cloud tenant set up that uses Entra ID, that login using those stolen credentials automatically took that VM and enrolled it into the target organization's cloud tenant. And ultimately, once this was connected, that's a pretty frightening sort of thing to run into. You've got what could be seen as a malicious virtual machine in your environment. Now, the silver lining here and the good news in this particular instance is that the enrollment that this organization had set up required that Microsoft Defender be installed when new devices were actually enrolled onto the network. So the beauty here and the ironic part of it is that as soon as that Microsoft Defender endpoint protection was installed on that virtual machine, several IOCs alerted, it was flagged. That brought it to the attention of Expel ultimately. So from there, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I love the irony of that. It's pretty interesting.
And there's lots to talk about that particular part of it. What's interesting though, as far as finishing off how this attack goes, is that we did catch them at this point and stopped them. And what we ended up discovering is that they pivoted at this point. So this didn't work, their attack. They used some of the other credentials to log into the corporate network, performed their usual reconnaissance to learn more about the environment, things like the bring your own device policies that the organization had, how they approach device management, the sort of things that would help further their attacks, trying to get around the roadblock that they ultimately ran into. And of course, as they tend to do, they also looked up information about gift cards. They looked into issuance processes, refund and exchange policies, and even fraud prevention that the organization had in place. So learning about all that so they could ultimately try to carry out those attacks further. Now, however, what ended up happening was at the same time here, Expel was doing follow-up checks and having identified Atlas Line being involved, looked at several of the IOCs and discovered that activity and were able to ultimately boot them out in the process.
That is fascinating. Jenny, as a part of the team that helped sort of stop this attack, walk us through what you saw, your perspective on this, how you realized, this wasn't just a normal device enrollment, kind of give us some insight into your end.
Yeah. So with regards to the virtual machine activity that Ben just discussed, we were able to trace that back to a particular user, right? So it's a particular user who's registering this device. And then from there, we're really interested in understanding, okay, what is like the root cause here? And in the process of kind of investigating all of like the cloud identity activity for that particular user, some things stand out to us that indicate to us, okay, this is kind of like a fairly targeted attack. We're able to see the attacker basically performing like a cloud enumeration in that user's account, basically trying to log into any cloud applications that user has access to, and also log into cloud applications the user does not have access to. They're performing, enumeration in like SharePoint, reviewing emails, anything that we're seeing in there, we're able to take those like IOCs, so like IP addresses, maybe users performing a particular like query in SharePoint, or in this case, that particular user, they also registered like an MFA device. We're able to scope those things within the environment or kind of like generally hunt, and then we're able to find, additional compromised users who maybe they're registering the same MFA device, or they're performing similar queries, that kind of thing. But I think generally, when we're looking at kind of like cloud to timeline activity for these users, one of the things that we saw is, the types of files that the attacker is looking at is very geared towards device management, registering devices, basically laterally moving into the network environment. And for me, anytime I see that, it's kind of more indicative of the attacker has some greater motive here.
Gotcha. When an attacker pulls up, when you see somebody pulling up articles about device enrollment and gift card policies, usually that seems like a red flag to me of somebody looking to do things nefariously.
Yeah, and I mean, it all depends on context, right? That very well may be, expected for a particular user based on their role, but if we're investigating through the MITRE attack lifecycle, we're looking at, okay, what is the IP or the initial access associated with this event? Like, is that login session, is that normal for the user? Then you're able to see pretty rapidly, like, yeah, this is not the user, right?
Yeah, it's good detective work there. Aaron, this is, again, I think we would all agree this is a pretty inventive move in terms of abusing what's possible in the cloud. From your research, how sophisticated is their understanding of cloud environments? And do you think creative attacks like this that we saw are sort of indicative or a sign of things to come?
Yeah, a lot of the folk within the com are pretty good with thinking about cloud infrastructure and those types of things. Part of that is because it often plays into a lot of their objectives, where if they're looking to get data or if they're looking to get specific data, those are the types of things that they have to know. So often, whether it's been times that we've seen customers targeted by Scattered Spider more properly, or the Atlas Lion group, they often start looking at those cloud infrastructure things right away. Attackers will often have a playbook so that they kind of have a good idea of what they're going to look for as soon as they do get some sort of access. And that's where they've spent the time to get some proficiency to understand how a lot of those things work. And one of the things that makes the com stand out too is that, unlike a lot of threat actors, they're much more based in the West. So they're a lot more familiar with some business processes and those types of things. So if they need some sort of access, they know a little bit better how to go about trying to get that type of access.
Yeah, that makes sense. Again, it's just fascinating to see what was done in this situation. We're making good time here. I'm going to pivot to our next section where we talk about the follow-up and the persistence that we saw. Jenny, you've already alluded to some of this, as have you been, but kind of double clicking on that. We're making good time here. We're going to talk about the persistence, and then we're going to talk about practical takeaways for listeners. But all right, so let's talk about what happened once we sort of, once they spun up this virtual machine and we sort of identified that. They pivoted to something else. Jenny, after being kicked out, Atlas Line, as you mentioned, didn't give up. Obviously it sounded like they were kind of digging around in some of our documents and trying to figure out, policies and things like that. How did you connect what you saw there to earlier activity? Again, you mentioned like IPs and things like that. Is that kind of what you were looking at here?
Yeah, so I think anytime you have an incident like this where there's some sort of very widespread vector, in this case, we saw the SMS phishing, that type of activity, your work doesn't just end because, you identified an account or you identified, okay, the attacker registered the device, I'm done here, right? You kind of go you kind of go into this phase where you're effectively performing active response. So for me, it was like, okay, every day I have like a list of IOCs and then the particular techniques that I'm looking for. We want to go ahead and rescope that. And additionally, any sort of like vendor alert that we get for, a login or any sort of activity there, we're viewing with like extreme scrutiny, right? So during this active response process, when we scoped the original incident, like we identified other compromised accounts, right? And at this point, we know, okay, the attacker has access to this information. We're starting to get an idea of maybe what their motivation is. That's going to help us as we continue to scope. And then, we very well may have like disabled these accounts that we think are compromised. We don't necessarily know like what other resources the attacker has access to, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, I think, there was like many accounts that we saw that were compromised in this case. The attacker, they got so far with certain accounts before, they were kind of like, they lost access to those accounts effectively. But yeah, we found a lot more. There was like some social engineering, of like help desk, I think we saw for this incident. And more there.
Yeah, totally. One of the things that stood out to me when I was reading through this was just the speed at which the attacker moved. I think whenever they sort of pivoted into their internal reconnaissance, they accessed, I think I read 19 apps and 111 SharePoint pages in minutes. I think that's right. But is it fair to assume that this type of behavior is common? Like where an attacker, once inside of it, sorry, wrong question. From a detection perspective, is that speed kind of a dead giveaway for an attack when you're looking at attacker behavior? Is that sort of an indicator that we're dealing with an attack?
I think it varies. One of the things that Aaron mentioned earlier is some of these actors, they have a playbook, which means once they get initial access, they have a pretty good idea of what they want to do, right? They know like, I'm going to perform this SharePoint query. I'm going to look for these files. I want to access these particular things. Sometimes for like the kind of like the more commodity or less sophisticated actors, you'll see that an account is compromised because you see, an anomalous login, but you're not actually going to see actions on target, until much later. In this case, with this attacker, because this is kind of like more of a targeted thing, the speed is definitely an indicator, right? The attacker, they get initial access, they're like, oh wow, I got access. Okay, I'm gonna start running, going through my playbook, doing all the things, right? And they're trying to perform as many of those like actions on target as quickly as possible, before they get identified and kicked out of the environment potentially. And
Yeah.
they're also setting up the persistence mechanisms as well, right? They're registering the MFA devices, they're compromising additional accounts, that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. Aaron, you're observing malicious behavior all day as a threat intelligence analyst. I'd assume this is relatively common, right? An attacker comes in, once it's on an environment, pivots to another strategy before they reach a dead end. Like, is that something that you're just seeing all the time based on what you're looking at?
Yeah. Also, if you hear a bell, that's the dog asking to go outside. She keeps ringing it over and over.
I had to roll outside of camera a second ago to let my dog in. So listen, the furry friends are always demanding. It's okay.
But yeah, definitely. They've already invested a lot into this campaign. So when they're going to target an organization, they're going to have backup plans. So for example, within a lot of the Atlas line attacks, they set up dedicated infrastructure. Within a short amount of time of setting that up, they're going to do the SMS phishing. And then they're going to be ready. So when they get those credentials from end users, they're going to start acting on them. And they're going to make sure that they have multiple attack paths so that if they run into a barrier with one method, that they're going to try to find another. And that's a lot just to make sure that their attack is ultimately successful, that they're able to set up multiple methods of persistence or other backups, as we said. We see this a lot with different types of attackers. For example, with a lot of the ransomware-shaped attacks, the attacker will set multiple backdoors. So they might deploy 2 or 3 different remote management tools that are commercial tools, or they might also set up their own unique backdoor at the same time.
Yeah. They have a playbook, just as the defenders have a playbook, the attackers have a playbook too, right? So, Ben, you and Jenny wrote about the cleverness of their ticket raising tactic to get Confluence access. Super fascinating to me as a part of this story too. Question for everyone here, maybe Ben, you can kind of give an idea, just give a brief overview on kind of that part of what you observed. But a question for everyone here, like, how can IT teams better protect against social engineering attempts that happen inside of their own support systems, right?
Yeah, well, I think what we ended up seeing was that the attackers wanted to gather some sort of information from Confluence, or at least get in there to see what was available. But the user that they had compromised didn't actually have access to Confluence. So ultimately, what they ended up doing was, in the name of that user, they logged an IT ticket. Ingeniously simple, to be fair. It's just one of those things that you would expect a normal user to do. But it begs a larger question. When something like that happens, when a user is asking for access, the big question, I think, from the IT team side of things is, do they need access to that? And that's a major issue. If it's somebody, let's say in, marketing, for instance, do they need access to, a Confluence that has very low level discussions and information about how various systems run within the organization? Answer is probably no in that case. That's one side of it. The other thing too is, when, say, somebody is within IT and they're compromised and asking for Confluence, you're going to want to figure out and verify, how are these people actually who they say they are? And that's a difficult thing to do. I'm sure we all have ideas on how to do that. The one that came to my mind thinking about this is contacting that particular user outside, in another means outside of the ticketing system. Say they've logged a ticket, instead of just replying back and forth on that ticket, maybe ping them on instant message. Or perhaps email. In this case, email, maybe not. The actual attack, they were deleting those emails behind the scenes, and folks like Jenny discovered that because they were hidden behind the scenes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, often within our own processes within Expel, that type of request always has to go to the manager as well of that individual. So then you get that second pair of eyes that says, hey, does this guy in the warehousing department actually need this? And you can get those types of checks a little bit better. The com's kind of known for trying to get into some of the messaging platforms and those types of things as well, whether that's getting access to Slack or Teams or those types of things. So it's definitely important to have those types of controls, or be mindful that if something seems out of the norm, there's a real possibility something else could be going on. That's
Mhm.
Yeah, I think if I recall correctly, in this case, the attacker, they didn't, sometimes we see attackers set up like inbox rules to delete emails. In this case, the attacker was much more scrupulous. So they're actually sitting behind the keyboard and individually deleting the emails from the ServiceNow ticketing system as they come in, which is pretty interesting.
That is interesting. I think, we're not making light of the insane hard task of like verifying either each user as the, the permissions come in. I know that, admins have a difficult time of keeping up of who needs track of what, and especially in the cloud, as you have, you're needing to give permissions to both humans and non-humans. It gets pretty difficult pretty quickly. So not to make light of that task, but it's very important, to avoid situations like this. Absolutely. All right, let's come in for a landing here. It's been a good discussion, kind of an overview of what we saw, sort of some practical takeaways. I think we've, especially on the last sort of discussion there, I think we've sort of implicitly discussed applications of this research for security teams, companies, but maybe to make it a little bit more explicit, I'd love to hear each of you give one practical takeaway that security teams can maybe start or work towards implementing starting today or this week to spare their organizations from attacks like this. Any thoughts? Anybody want to take a first sort of swing at that?
Well, there was one thing that
Yeah,
happened in this attack there. Oh, sorry, Aaron, did you want to go? You can go ahead.
You go, Ben.
The one thing I was going to
Go, Aaron. You go.
So I was going to point out the thing that we've seen in most cases, whether it's no matter who they're being targeted by, often in cases where the comm is involved, having requirements to log in from a managed device can stop those attacks. Because even if there's some sort of SIM swapping or something going on like that, you still have that restriction of requiring a managed device. And while that might seem strenuous for a lot of organizations, it's really required in some ways to really block these attackers from getting in at all. So depending on the amount of tolerance you have for this type of thing, it's really important to consider how firmly you can get those tied down and just make sure that authorized users are the only ones accessing resources.
It's helpful. Ben, do you want to take the next one here?
Well, I think Aaron and I were actually thinking along similar lines. What I was going to call out was that in this particular attack, the nice part and the thing that actually stopped the most interesting and novel thing that we saw was that these folks had these policies in place for their enrollment within their cloud. And when that VM was enrolled, automatically, like we were saying, Microsoft Defender was brought right in, and it caught it. Their policies actually worked to catch the most, I guess, out of the ordinary aspect of this particular attack.
I would assume if those enrollment policies weren't in place, it could have gotten out of hand pretty quickly. Absolutely.
Yeah, usually a lot of what you often hear about is like when a vendor in the environment has an unmanaged device, or if there's just other devices that an organization has no visibility to. There, like the attacker just has free reign. So then having that type of requirement for devices in your organization to have that to be managed with an EDR agent, that just goes a long way.
Totally. Jenny?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Aaron and Ben said. I think specifically for Atlas Lion, they do target retail organizations. And so you may be in an organization where it may also not be feasible to have set a conditional access policy where someone is required to log in from like a managed device, right? Maybe you have a lot of like store workers logging in from their phone, so on and so forth. One strong takeaway that I would present is consider the case or consider incidents where the attacker is interested in laterally moving into a network environment. I think sometimes when we think about these cloud incidents, we're thinking, okay, what kind of data does the attacker have access to within the email account, right? Or in the SharePoint or whatever the case may be. We don't always consider this case where the attacker is interested in getting the network access. So just kind of thinking through what does that situation look like for your organization? And do you have kind of the planning in place to address?
Yeah, because you would assume that, to wreak the most damage, they're trying to figure out, what is least expected, and sort of laterally moving outside of whatever that attack surface is, could be the way that they decide to go. All right. Q&A here. We don't have any questions that have dropped in yet. If anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in. And I'll say this too, if anybody has any questions on the back end after watching the replay, or just don't feel comfortable posting questions in the comments, it's totally fine. Send us to them afterwards. Send them over to Expel. You can send them to me, ben.baker@expel.com. Happy to take those. But let's do this. We've made good time here. Rather than doing Q&A, is there anything that we haven't, that we've missed in the discussion that's worth discussing? But can anybody think of anything that's worth discussing that maybe we haven't touched on? And if no, that is all right. That's okay. Told you it was. So we're going to do that. Go, Aaron, go. He's got something.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to do was give a plug to some researchers that are also talking about the COM at SleuthCon. SleuthCon is one of my favorite conferences that is just talking about cybercrime. And Expel, we really focus on some of the detection part of it, and we're often seeing when organizations are being attacked. But the talk that's happening there on June 6th is a bit more about the culture of the COM and talking about how these actors behave, who they are, and a lot of those factors. And it's done by some amazing researchers, so I just really want to plug them and plug that conference.
It's a great call out, and I think that is a good note to end this on. Appreciate everybody either watching this live or catching it on demand. Again, you can read the full readout of sort of what we saw in this attack right there. It was a team effort. Ben, Aaron, Jenny, thank all of you for kind of putting this together. Again, the specific URL is part 1 and has a link to part 2. Highly recommend you take a look. We are, as a brand at Expel, we're working on frivolously, if I may say so, to, put out more of what we're seeing from a threat research perspective. So definitely keep an eye on our blog, expel.com/blog. Also follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Blue Sky and all of that jazz, all of the socials to catch all of the latest work that we're doing there. And just really exciting times. A lot of really smart people that work here. So hopefully get more of that stuff out there for you to see. Again, if you have any questions after the session that you have a chance to ask, feel free to reach out. And again, lastly, huge thanks to our threat and SOC team for taking time out of your busy schedules to discuss. It's important research. Good stuff. All right. Hey. This is it for me. We'll catch you next time. The next LinkedIn Live we have maybe next month. All right. Thank you.